Hello, this is Shahid Siddiqui. Today we'll be talking about rethinking teacher education in 21st century. This century is considered to be a century of knowledge and cutthroat competition. According to a World Bank report, the difference between developed and developing countries is in fact the difference of knowledge. So if we want to be included in the list of developed countries, we need to focus on the construction of knowledge. One of the ways of construction of knowledge is carrying out research. And this research usually happens in universities and educational institutions. In other words, we need to focus on education and we need to focus on the qualitative improvement in education. When we talk of qualitative improvement, we need to look at the different commonplaces of curriculum, i.e. books, teachers, students, assessment system, and school milieu. All these factors are very important. And if we want to improve the quality of education, we need to focus on all of these factors. Buildings are important, facilities are important, and teaching materials and curriculum are important. But in the center, the character of teacher is the most important character that plays a very vital role in the process of education. It is the interaction of teacher with students, with teaching materials, with assessment system, and with other forces of school or educational institution that actually makes curriculum. So if we want to improve education, we need to focus on the key player, that is the teacher. It's the teacher that makes the whole process vibrant and meaningful. And it's the teacher whose education, training, professional development is very important. If we look at the teacher education opportunities in Pakistan, we see that these courses are available at different levels, in institutes, in colleges, and in the departments of education of universities. And there are hundreds of programs of teacher education. And every year, these educational institutions are churning out thousands of educated teachers. But what is happening is that we don't see any significant change brought about by these so-called educated teachers. The big question then is that what is the role of teacher education? Is it important to give teacher education to a teacher to make a better teacher? Because one very interesting research which was carried out in Pakistan showed that when two groups of students were taken in a study, one group was taught by those teachers who got teacher education, and the other group was taught by those teachers who didn't get any teacher education. The result was that there was no significant difference in the performance of those two groups of students. That raises a big question. Is there a real need for teacher education? Another way of looking at this result is that there is some gap in teacher education, the kind of teacher education programs we are offering to our students. So if we look at most of the teacher education programs in Pakistan, we see one common thing. Most of these programs are focusing on method. They are focusing on pedagogical practices, teaching skills. So what happens is that in most of the cases, a handful of skills and strategies are given to teachers, and it is assumed that now they have become good teachers. When they go back to their schools or colleges or universities, they realize that the kind of teacher education they got has nothing to do with the realities. Most of these teacher education programs, they promote the existing transmission paradigm of teaching. There are hardly any components in our teacher education programs that focus on conceptual change of teachers or their attitudinal change. In fact, instead of bringing about any change, these teacher education programs are further strengthening the transmission-based teaching. When we look at this transmission paradigm of teaching, we realize that this paradigm is no more in fashion in most of the countries of the world. But in Pakistan, in the mainstream schools, we still find transmission-based teaching. The philosophy of this paradigm is that whatever knowledge we have, the skills we have, and the values we have to transmit or transfer this knowledge, values, and skills to the next generation. And there are three big assumptions underlying this transmission paradigm. The first assumption is that students are empty vessels or clean slates. And in the process of education, their role is very passive. They are always at the receiving end. The second assumption in this paradigm is that the teacher knows everything. That is why the teacher doesn't like students asking questions in class. Students are always discouraged to ask questions because this means that they are challenging the authority of teachers. Another related assumption is that the teacher is the only source of knowledge. So in some cases, when the teacher doesn't know the answer, even then he or she gives a wrong answer and misleads. The third important assumption in transmission-based teaching is that knowledge is something fixed, it's static, and it's out there. So if we believe in these three assumptions, that knowledge is a fixed entity, that the students are empty vessels, and that the teachers know everything, then the kind of education that comes to our mind is that the teacher's only job is to take out the lid of students' brains and pour down the knowledge, skills, and values they have. Unfortunately, these three assumptions are not true. They have been challenged, and let's look at these three assumptions one by one. First, that the students are empty vessels and clean slates. The latest researches have proven that that is not the case. Students' early life, 3 to 5 years, are very vital years, and 80% of their personality is complete in these years. Students in your kindergarten class are not empty vessels or clean slates. There are researches available that even before birth, there are certain imprints on the brain of fetus. This means that the students sitting in your class, they have their own observations, they have their own concepts about different things. So they should not be taken as clean slates or empty vessels. The second assumption was that the teacher knows everything. This is logically incorrect. Nobody can claim that he or she knows everything. And a related assumption was that the teacher was the only source of knowledge. Again, that is not correct. And this age, that is 21st century, has already proven that there are so many different sources for students to learn, and teacher is just one source of knowledge. The third assumption is that the knowledge is something static, it is fixed, it's out there. And the only job of teacher is to transmit this knowledge to the students, to pour this knowledge into the brains of empty vessels. Again, this concept, this view of knowledge has been challenged. Knowledge is no more a noun these days. Knowledge is a verb. Knowledge is an action verb. A large part of knowledge is socially constructed. It is constructed on daily basis. In 21st century, the construction of knowledge has been expedited so many times. So if all these assumptions are falsified, this means that the transmission paradigm, which is being used in most of the public sector mainstream schools in Pakistan, the teachers need to move away from it. And the most contemporary paradigm being used in education is the transformation paradigm. As the name suggests, it is directly linked with change. So the purpose of education, which in transmission paradigm was just to transmit or transfer knowledge and skills and values to the next generation, in transformation paradigm, it is linked with change. Change in students' lives and change at societal level. So we need to revisit the objective of education in 21st century. It is not transmission, it is transformation. And with that, if we look at some of the teacher education programs, we observe that the focus is only on method. The holistic view of professional development includes 3 levels of change: conceptual change, pedagogical change, and attitudinal change. Unfortunately, most of the teacher education programs, they ignore or underplay the conceptual change and attitudinal change. And the reason is obvious, because the change at conceptual level and attitudinal level is time-taking, and it's relatively more difficult to demonstrate change at these 2 levels. So most of the teacher education programs, they resort to the easy way out, i.e. giving a handful of skills and strategies to the teachers, and that is to them teacher education. The result is very obvious, that as far as quality of education is concerned in our classrooms, there is a big question mark. With this, now we need to look at the challenges of 21st century. As I shared with you in the beginning, 21st century is a century of knowledge, and it's a century of cutthroat competition. In this century, there is no room for mediocre people. 21st century is a highly unpredictable century. And the reason is that the speed of change has been expedited so many times. The same amount of change which used to take place in years in the past is now taking place in weeks and in days. So when we think of planning in 21st century, planning down the road for 5 years or 10 years is relatively very difficult, because things are changing at a very fast pace. But still, there are certain skills which they say are going to be very important. Some of these skills can be categorized in 3 categories: the learning skills, literacy skills, and life skills. Now, in learning skills, we include critical thinking, creativity, collaboration, and communication. I'll come back to this, especially the skill of creativity and critical thinking later on. The second category of skills is the literacy skills. And in this category, we include information literacy, media literacy, and technology literacy. In the third category, we have life skills. In this category, we include emotional intelligence, flexibility, leadership, initiative, productivity, social skills, peace, and tolerance education. So, if we look at some of the major skills which are going to be required by our students in 21st century, the list goes like this: artificial intelligence, critical thinking, creativity, communication, collaboration, and adaptability. As I said before, it's relatively very difficult to foresee what is going to happen 10 years down the road in 21st century because of the very fast pace of change. But whatever is going to be the circumstances, creativity and critical thinking are going to be very helpful for our students. With that, the skill of flexibility and adaptability, they will help them. Now, if we look at our teacher education programs, we don't see these components covered in the syllabus. The whole emphasis has gone to literacy skills, and the life skills and the learning skills are underplayed. This is high time that we should go back to our teacher education programs. The teacher education programs need to be redesigned, keeping in front of us the educational framework of 21st century. 21st century requires from students skills of critical thinking, creativity, communication, and collaboration. But these kind of students can only be prepared by those teachers who themselves are critical thinkers, who are reflective practitioners, who have flexibility and adaptability, who believe in collaboration and creativity, and who are always in learning paradigm. Unfortunately, the existing teacher education programs are not producing thinking teachers. And if that is the case, how can we produce thinking human beings from our universities and colleges? Thank you.